Welcome back to Notebook Summaries. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the surprisingly central history of New Jersey. It's a state that's often just seen as the land between two huge cities. But its story is so much more than a simple pass-through. It's actually a focal point, a place where a huge part of the American identity was forged. So that really gets us to the big question, right? How did this specific slice of land, squeezed between Philly and New York, become so incredibly important to the whole American story? Well, the answer is all in its unique position, not just on a map, but as a crossroads for people, for power, for conflict, and for incredible innovation. Let's dig in. All right, so our story has to start way, way back, long before there were any states or colonies. We have to go back to a time when the land itself was being carved out by these immense forces of nature, which really set the stage for everything that was to come. I mean, just try to imagine that. 15,000 years ago, you had this colossal glacier, a wall of ice literally hundreds of feet high that finally started to melt and pull back. As it receded, it carved out the rivers and valleys we know today. And into this brand new, lush landscape, the first Paleo-Indian hunter-gatherers moved in. This wasn't just the beginning of human history here. It was pretty much the dawn of a habitable world for this part of the continent. Okay, let's jump forward a bit, to about 1,000 years ago. The people who would really come to define this land before the Europeans showed up were the Lenape. And they had a really sophisticated society. They totally mastered their environment. They used companion planting, you might have heard of it as the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash. It's this brilliant system where each plant actually helps the others grow. And their presence is still felt today. Their language echoes in place names all over the state, like Hackensack, Passaic, and Manahawkin. It's this permanent reminder of their deep, deep roots here. So when Europeans started arriving in the 1500s and 1600s, New Jersey immediately became this crossroads of empires. You can see on this timeline just a century of intense competition. First you have the French, then the Dutch, the Swedes pop up, and finally the English. They all wanted a piece of this strategic land. And this really set the pattern for the next century. This region was going to be a prize to be won, a place where different cultures would constantly clash, trade, and eventually blend. Now, once the English took control in 1664, you might think things would finally settle down a bit, but you'd be wrong. The story of colonial New Jersey actually gets even more complicated, with, believe it or not, a literal line drawn right down the middle of it. So the province was split between two owners, and they had two totally different visions for how society should work. Over in East Jersey, you had settlers who were mostly Puritans from New England, and they built a more rigid, religiously ordered culture. But West Jersey, which was controlled by Quakers, became this haven for religious freedom. Its founding document was incredibly liberal for its time, guaranteeing rights like trial by jury and religious tolerance, specifically to get more people to move there. So right from the very beginning, you've got these two totally distinct cultures developing side by side in one colony. For decades, the exact location of that dividing line was a huge source of conflict. They kept resurveying it, arguing over land ownership and political power. Finally, in 1702, the British Crown pretty much had enough of all the squabbling and just reunited the two halves into a single royal colony. But, that cultural divide between North and South Jersey that was born back then, you could argue it still exists today. All this history of division and reunion really sets the stage perfectly for what is maybe New Jersey's most famous chapter. If there was ever a moment when the state absolutely lived up to its Crossroads nickname, it was during the American Revolutionary War. Just think about that number for a second. Over 100? More battles, more skirmishes, more engagements were fought right here in New Jersey than in any other colony. It wasn't just some backdrop for the war. For years, it was the central stage, where the fate of the entire revolution was decided again and again, with both armies marching back and forth across its fields and towns. And what's so amazing about this slide is that it captures the absolute turning point of the entire war. By the end of 1776, the American cause was frankly on the brink of complete collapse. And then came these 10 crucial days. You have the famous freezing Christmas night crossing of the Delaware, the total surprise attack on the Hessian mercenaries in Trenton, and then this brilliant follow-up victory at Princeton. It was just a stunning, unbelievable reversal of fortune, and it all happened right here on New Jersey soil. And here's the key takeaway. These weren't just military victories. Their real power was psychological.
They completely reignited the flickering hope of independence across all the colonies, they convinced soldiers whose contracts were up to re-enlist, and they proved to the world that Washington's ragtag army could actually beat the most powerful military on the planet.
But New Jersey's role wasn't just on the battlefield. Politically, it was surprisingly progressive and really influential. Get this, its first constitution in 1776 gave voting rights to all inhabitants who met a property requirement, which for a while actually included women and free African Americans, a right that was, very sadly, taken away in 1807. And at the Constitutional Convention, the New Jersey Plan led directly to the creation of the U.S. Senate, which protects the influence of smaller states to this very day.
So after the Revolution, New Jersey's role as a crossroads started to evolve. In the 19th century, it became a crossroads of farming, sure, but also of industry and truly world-changing invention. Alexander Hamilton himself saw the incredible potential of the Great Falls in Paterson. He pictured a city powered by water, and it basically became the blueprint for American industry. Mills for textiles, for firearms, Samuel Colt's first revolver was made right there, even locomotives, all powered by those falls. Paterson's nickname was Silk City, which just tells you how dominant it was in manufacturing. So how do you power an industrial revolution? Well, you have to connect everything. New Jersey first built this amazing network of canals to move coal and iron from one side of the state to the other. But then came the railroads, and they are what truly cemented its role as the essential corridor between Philly and New York. The Camden and Amboy Railroad cut a journey that used to take multiple grueling days down to just 7 hours. That's a complete transformation in the speed of life itself. And then there was Edison. Working out of his invention factory in Menlo Park, he was basically a one-man industrial revolution. That number, over 1,000 patents, is just staggering. We're talking about the phonograph, a commercially viable light bulb, the building blocks of motion pictures. It's honestly impossible to overstate the impact that this one lab in central New Jersey had on the entire modern world. But the 19th century also brings this deep conflict in the state into sharp focus. On one hand, New Jersey was a key stop on the Underground Railroad, and its large Quaker population was strongly anti-slavery. But on the other hand, parts of its economy still depended on enslaved labor, and it was the very last northern state to fully abolish the institution. It even voted against Abraham Lincoln twice. It's a really powerful example of how the state was a crossroads of the nation's deepest and most painful contradictions. All right, let's jump into the 20th century. This is where New Jersey continued to find itself right at the center of huge national and global events, reflecting both the triumphs and the tensions of modern America. This slide is really just a snapshot of a turbulent century. You had the shocking Hindenburg disaster, with the giant airship exploding over Lakehurst, broadcast live to a horrified world. During World War II, the state's shipyards were just pumping out battleships and destroyers for the Allied war effort. The 1960s brought deep-seated anger over racial inequality boiling to the surface in the Newark riots. But in that same decade, the state hosted a key moment of de-escalation in the Cold War at the Glassboro Summit. And of course, tragically, New Jersey's proximity to New York meant it shared deeply in the pain of September 11th, losing almost 700 of its residents. So, as we wrap this all up, the theme just couldn't be clearer. From the clash of empires and the crucible of revolution, to the birth of industry, the fight for civil rights, and the massive challenges of the modern world, New Jersey has consistently been the place where America's biggest stories all seem to converge. And that leaves us with a really interesting question for the future. Given this long, complex history as this dynamic and, sometimes contradictory meeting point, what kind of challenges and innovations are going to define New Jersey's next chapter? Hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into New Jersey's history, be sure to check out the other videos in our U.S. State Histories playlist. And for more explainers just like this one, make sure you subscribe to Notebook Summaries. Thanks so much for watching.